Now? Okay. Good morning, everyone. I am Reverend Hugh Odhner. I'm from the Bernathen area. I'm pastor of what we call the Philadelphia Society of the Lord's New Church. And this is the Freiburg New Church Assembly. It is Tuesday, August 7, 2018. My talk is on the first act of charity, which my wife has written up here so that you can read along, but also because I want to talk just briefly about some of the technical details. The first act of charity is to remove evils, and the second act of charity is to do goods which are of use to the neighbor. I've modified it a little bit up here. In the original Latin, this sentence literally reads, the first of charity is to put away evils, and the second of it is to do goods which are of use to the neighbor. Now, in English, we don't normally like an adjective that has no noun to modify. So what has happened to our English-speaking minds, we desire that adjectives have an object or a subject that they modify. Some translators have inserted the word thing as the subject modified by first and second. You can look in some of the green translations up there, TCR 435, and you'll see thing. Sometimes they just left it as it was, the first of charity. And I mention this because when we study the teachings about charity, we can see that the first being referred to is not a thing, but an act or an action. Charity involves doing, not just intellectual thinking or kind thoughtfulness. So the first act of charity, or the first charitable action, we are told, is the putting away or removal of evils that are within us. And by the way, I did some research to find out what that word should be. And after semi-exhaustive research, it came out clear that Swedenborg was talking about actions. He was talking about doing. And that's why I chose act. And will continue to do so until I have been found out that I'm wrong on that. Now, while we may know this, that is, that the first act of charity is to put away evils, and the second of charity is to do goods which are of use to the neighbor, do we really consider the implications? So often in the Christian church, we talk about the necessity of doing charitable actions and being charitable, by which we mean doing good deeds. But do we realize that avoiding evil thoughts, desires, and motivations in ourselves are in fact a charitable action? And according to True Christian Religion 435, this needs to be the first charitable action that we do. And by the way, modifications of this sentence are found in other works. But I have to say, this sounds so unpleasant. Can't we just skip over all that yucky shunning of evil stuff and just do good stuff? Well, consider the words of the Lord to the Pharisees about the need to clean the inside of the cup and the platter and not just the outside. You know, the Lord sometimes was pretty harsh in his words. So he said, "Woe unto you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but inside they are full of greed and self-indulgence. You blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and platter, that the outside of them may be clean also." Now, the Lord here was speaking not just to some self-righteous Pharisees, but also to us. telling us about our need to do something, to do some cleaning up inside ourselves. To clean the inside of the cup and platter means that we need to purify our minds. That is, we need to purify our thoughts and intentions. And more on this, see True Christian Religion 215. Unless our minds are purified, everything else, our actions, our conversations are filled with self-love and not the presence of the Lord within us. If evils are not removed from our thoughts and intentions, we are unable to do anything that is truly good. Now, True Christian Religion explains it this way. And I'm also reading from True Christian Religion 435. In the doctrine of charity, this holds the first place, that the first act of charity is not to do evil to the neighbor, and the second act is to do good to them. This tenet is like a door to the doctrine of charity. A person may see from reason itself that so far as evil is firmly seated in the will, it is not put away. The good that they do is impregnated with that evil. For evil is then inside the good, like a kernel in its shell, or like marrow in a bone. Therefore, although the good that is done by such a person appears to be good, still intrinsically it is not good. Willing evil and doing right are two essentially opposite things. These two cannot exist in the same mind. That is, evil in the internal of a person and good in their external. If they do, the good in the external is like a wound superficially healed, within which there is putrid matter. True Christian Religion 435. And those of you who have read Swedenborg know he has a way with words and expressing things with very powerful analogies. The little book entitled Charity adds to this, and I have to say one of my favorite books is a little book, posthumous, called Charity. It's found in the green copies, posthumous theological works, but it was also published by the Swedenborg Society as a separate little book entitled Charity. It's one of my favorites. I think Nancy might be holding up.
This is the one that was published by the Foundation.
Yeah.
The newest Foundation copy is Charity.
Yeah, 1995. So this one is edited.
To me, it's one of the nicest little books because it sometimes gets so specific. To go on, this little book entitled Charity adds to this, stating that the first act of charity is to look to the Lord and shun evils because they are sins. This is done by repentance. That's, by the way, the first number in the little book on charity, Charity number 1. It then goes on to say, before repentance, good is spurious good. It is the same with charity, because good is of charity. For there is evil inwardly within a person because it has not been opened and therefore not healed. And genuine good cannot spring from evil. The good which springs from evil may in outward form appear good, but within it is the person such as they inwardly are. All that the person then does is an image of himself. On this account, the good which anyone does with the body may appear good before those who see only the external. But within there lies hidden the will and the intention, which may be that they wish to be thought of as sincere and good. Sony was referring to it as merit-seeking. In a word, it is good that it is either merit-seeking or hypocritical or diabolical, diabolical. That's devilish. That's charity number 6. This is not a pretty picture. Now, the Word teaches that we may do acts of charity that are good works because they benefit others. And in an absolute sense, such works are good. They may benefit others and improve the world around us. However, within us, prior to repentance and the removal of evils, these works that we do may not truly be good. And I'm going to read again from True Christian from Charity. It is believed, and boy does this tie in with the first talk, it is believed that giving to the poor, helping the needy, assisting widows and orphans, benefiting ministers, I like that part, contributing to churches, hospitals, and various pious uses is of charity. Again, that feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, sheltering the stranger, clothing the naked, visiting the sick, going to those bound in prison, and many other things are good works of charity. And then it goes on, but yet they are good only insofar as a person shuns evils as sins. If a person does these good works before shunning evils as sins, they are external, even merit-seeking, because they spring from an impure fountain, and things issuing from such a fountain are inwardly evil. And further, an evil person, as well as a good one, can do good. They can help someone in need and can do them many good offices from goodwill, kindness, friendship, or compassion. But nevertheless, these things are not of charity with the one who does them, but with the one to whom charity is exercised. To outward appearance it is charity, and that is from charity number 17 and 40. And so I want to go over to this. The first act of charity is to remove evils. We could get the idea, and I think I had this idea at one time, that we can't do anything good for anybody unless we first do this. So we have to spend most of our time removing the evils, then we'll be in a position to do good to others. The one problem with that is I find that our physical life in this world may come to an end first. And that is not the way that the teaching is to be understood. The first act of charity is to remove evils within ourselves. But we can do good works to others even though we're not in a purely good state. The teachings of Swedenborg never say don't do good works. The emphasis here is first a concentration on doing good, you might say to ourselves, and that will be by removing evils. So that's the first part. Remove evils from ourselves, but don't neglect to do good works when the opportunity occurs and you see that you can do a good work. And notice the second act of charity is to do good. And then it qualifies it, which are of use to the neighbor, which is of use to the neighbor. So in this one, don't think it's first this, then this, but it's both at the same time. It compares this part to repentance, which means it's part of regeneration. Being born again, that's a continual process with us. And so while we're concentrating on that one, we're also able to do this one. It's not one that is first in time, but rather that one is first in intention, and the other one can be done along with it. Now, there's a few things about this, though. When we shun evils as sins, we come into a better position and state to be able to help others. The reason is because we've got experience in fighting against a certain evil, and we get, when that happens, we get some enlightenment. If you've passed through a struggle many times, you're in a position to help others who are passing through that same struggle. And that's what happens here. We can be in a better position to help others. But I'll continue on. For many of us, the thought of searching or examining ourselves for any evils that we may have seems depressing. And in fact, it can be if we go overboard. There are many of us who get wrapped up in this part. And just a little bit of, what's the word? Self-disclosure. My eldest daughter once time said that I was prone to endless self-examination. I think there are others who we are prone to endless self-examination. We are always saying something else we need to work on. You might say it could be a form of our obsessive-compulsive disorder. We're always trying to arrange and get rid of the evils. The difficulty is, when you think about it, we're really, really focused a lot on ourselves. And the purpose of all of this is to come down to this. So, we can go overboard. And this is why the teaching of Swedenborg cautions us to look for only one or two evils to work on and deal with those. That's a really nice thing to know. In fact, I think he says only a few a year. So if you're wondering about how to take this, one or two a year. There's also, by the way, and this is about the self-examination part. Swedenborg also talks about an easier kind of repentance, which is a relief for all of us. The easier kind of repentance is that as soon as you detect some evil motive or desire coming up, or you know that retort you're going to get to that person that just hurt your feelings, is simply to not do it. Because think about it, if you don't do the evil, you're doing the opposite. Or at least you could say doing nothing is sometimes better than doing what is wrong. So that's the easier kind. And we can practice that almost every day. The opportunities seem to be endless. Now, it seems much more delightful to just go out and be kind and helpful to others. Doing that is what we commonly call charity. Yet, we are confronted with these strong and repeated teachings that we can do nothing good that is truly good until we have first removed evils from ourselves through repentance. Wouldn't we much rather just do the second act of charity, that is, doing good works that are useful to others, than to think about that first act of charity, which is to examine ourselves and shun evils because they are sins, by practicing repentance? Perhaps when we are thinking this way, it may help us to keep in mind that the first act of charity, the putting away or shunning of evils as sins, is in fact itself an act of charity. Keep in mind these words in charity number 32, and I hold this up as kind of the end because it is so uplifting, I think. It can therefore be taken as a maxim that to shun evils as sins is to do good. That's charity number 32. So when you're doing this, you're actually engaged in a good work. And that good work transforms our whole person. That's what turns us from being a person of the world to a person of heaven, to an angel. And at the same time we're doing this, we can be doing this to others. Thank you. Any questions, thoughts? Yes.
As I was listening, I hadn't heard it this way before somehow, but I really like the idea that going through dealing with a tough situation and coming out better for it, or going through a temptation and coming out the other end is the first act of charity, and that puts us in a position to help others. The idea of an addiction or alcoholism or something that some of us have struggled with, and you could say the first act of charity there is to remove that evil, or to remove something that is harming us and therefore those around us. And the second act is to do good, and that would be to stay away from that addictive substance or alcohol or whatever that addiction is. And that puts us in a position to be more effective in the second act of charity, which is to do good, which is of use for a neighbor. And so really, it's each time we go through a temptation and I don't want to say a victory, but maybe it is a victory, where we put something behind us that has been hurting us or hurting others around us, then we're put in a position to be able to first do more good just by not being in such a struggle with a demon, you might say, and then second to reach out because we've been there, done that, and we're more able to help other people who face a similar addiction or issue.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes.
I like that you broke it down even more. It kind of made me think about what Sage was saying the other day when she was talking about uses, and she was saying, well, wow, this is really overwhelming. Like, how do I do this? And she sort of said, well, maybe the first thing you do is just to not do anything. And that's like, made me think of, the Hippocratic Oath, first do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
To be able to do any good, first have to not be doing any kind of help. So that's sort of, when you first read that, you're like, oh, wow, I have to remove evil before I can do good. But it's like, well, no, maybe you just don't do anything at first and you wait for the opportunity to come along and do something.
Yeah, and that's
If you're looking for it, you'll see it.
that's what I also had to learn from this, because as I mentioned, the first idea I had was we have to do this first act before we can do the second. But it isn't that way. We are engaged in the first act and we're doing the second. And that shorter form of repentance I mentioned, is simply resist doing what is wrong or hurtful, and then just doing that, which may involve simply keeping our mouth shut, for example, and doing nothing. That is better than the alternative. Yes.
Well, I also see this as Swedenborg's upward spiral of spiritual growth, because when we, remove the one or two evils, and we do some good in the world, when we experience it being of use to the neighbor, we're inspired to go back and remove more evils so that we can do greater good. And then the experience of the usefulness is it's good for the neighbor, but it's also inspiring to us to keep on going.
It's by the way, it's referred to as the circle of life, which is the circle of regeneration. There's a circle of life in all of us, and it is a spiral, and it tends to, for those of us heading toward heaven, it is spiraling upward. Unfortunately, there are those who choose the other path and they start spiraling downward. But with this, we can also be in a better position to help those who are starting on the path spiraling downward. Because from our own experience in dealing with an evil, a difficulty, we might be in a position to help somebody else. Yes? Dave.
Two things. One, it may be dangerous to give people freedom to just work on one or two evils, because they might pick easy ones and ignore really important ones they need to get rid of right away, or they'll be hurting other people. So I think you have to be careful.
Yeah.
Second thing, that quote on the board is a great example of beware of taking things out of context. And it happens in all kinds of quotations in life, but you explained how, and I noted, I was going to mention right away, well, it looks like you have to do, clearly they do number one before you can do number two. And I like when you read another quote saying, remove, is first act of charity is remove evils from our thoughts and intentions. I like that addition to it, but you only learn that when you take that statement and then read that in context of TCR 435, but even better, look up other parts of that it relates to, and then you can get a full picture of it, because that, like a lot of quotations taken out of context, that can be very misunderstood. And one other thing, I understand, and I like using the word act compared to thing, and in English we need to put something there, but I kind of like leaving it blank, because depending where you are in your spiritual growth, you can put in, okay, the first thought of charity, or the first thing I need to do, or the first act. You can, but that's, of all those, if you're going to use one, that's a good one.
I can do it this way, though.
Right, in Latin.
Fill in the blank.
Yeah, fill in the blank, right.
And fill in the blank according to what is needed in your life. I did want to comment, though, yes, we might start out with the easy ones, but at least it's starting out. And Swedenborg says that for practicing repentance for many people is hard. So they need to start out with the easy ones. That is actually the context in which that easier form of repentance is mentioned. That this self-examination is difficult for some people. And it says especially with those who are not used to doing it. So you might say, in one sense, we all start out with the easy ones because the deeper ones are mercifully hidden from us.
Yeah, we have to learn to play hot cross buns before you can play big buns.
Yeah, right.
Good example.
Yes.
I had a way, a construct that was given to me that also helps make repentance and regeneration a lot easier. And that is to maybe take away from this word evils all that sort of bad, wrong, shameful, horrible connotation that has comes along with the use of that word for centuries or whatever, and just think of it as limitations. The limitations of being a human. You don't have to be ashamed of that. You're human. You're not God. Only God is unlimited. We're all limited. The highest angels are limited. They have what we call evils. You know, being not God is evil, is limited. So the first fill in the blank of charity is to notice your limitations. Laugh at yourself when you're acting from them. Be kind to yourself about it. Say, hey, you know, I'm a limited human being, and look at this limitation. Everything that I'm doing, I'm trying to get merit from it. You know, wow. Thank you, evil spirits, for trying to get me to go there. I'm just not going to listen to it at the moment. Thank you very much for lifting that up to me. I've noticed this limitation, and I'm just, this moment, going to choose to not act out on it. And just take that.
Denise and Dave.
I was thinking of with little children, the first of charity in that sense is, you could say the first is to remove evils. Don't hit your brother, don't bite, stop doing that, pick up, or you know, it's a whole bunch of no and stop and don't. And then we're also working on now help your little brother up, or say thank you to somebody who helped you, or, you know, doing the second act of charity.
Mhm.
But until they learn not to bite their brother, they, you know, the second act of charity would be, well, I'm sorry for biting you, or, you know, first I'm just saying it in very simple terms. Which those children have to be taught something that goes against their nature. They want to do whatever they want to do, and then and that sort of, once they've gotten over that impulse to bite or to throw food all over or whatever it is, then the next thing is to reach out and to actually do good. But we don't want to say first you must never bite and then you can be nice to your, you know, it's all one. But you got to stop the worst of the behaviors first.
They're ongoing at the same time.
Yeah.
Dave, and then
Right,
Dee.
and that kind of supports my thing. Well, be careful just not to choose an easy one. If you're doing something that's dangerous to the people around you, you might want to pick that one first and then work on an easy one. But what I was going to say, one of the Swedenborg's concepts that I don't care for is that we can never remove evils, we can only put them to the side. So I just wanted to throw that in, even though I kind of wish the Lord and I could remove the evils from me, but I've been reminded a few times in this room, no, they're only put to the side, and we can pick them up again if we change our mind.
Yeah, that's one of the unfortunate things, because I've been amazed that you can pick up these passages in Swedenborg and then you'll find out something else that disagrees with the first one. So it does talk about many times removing evils from ourselves. But the deeper part of that is that it's never completely removed. You know, there's always something that needs to be worked on. You might say when we remove an evil, we're removing it on a certain level, and there's another level of it that we're going to eventually, when we're ready, to take care of. One of the merciful things of the Lord, it says that He never gives us more than we can handle. That, by the way, when we're under severe temptation or troubles, is really hard to grasp. What do you mean by this? Because it seems like, no, we can't handle it. But He protects us from the attacks of the hells that we actually can't handle. He actually protects us from deeper levels of ourself that we cannot yet handle. Dean.
I read Dickens' Bleak House this winter, and there's a character in there, I think her name was Goolsby, and she was just all about sending food to Africa, to some mythical country in Africa. And she had all these children, and as the book progresses, Dickens, without saying a word, points out to her, to the reader, how much she's hurting her own children and her own family because she's giving so much to everybody else. I don't know. I think it's Goolsby.
Yes.
I was just thinking we could change the word remove to recognize. That if on a daily basis we recognize what our transgressions are, our mistakes, and then move to correct them.
Yeah, which is the removal part of it.
Right.
I think my next talk, I will deal with the tendency that we have to know certain truths and do nothing with them. Yes.
So I've got just a couple of comments. One is to reframe this notion. I've struggled with this idea of so-called evils are removed issue. I have a different way of thinking about it, which I share. The other, but before, first of all, just to say, appreciate your handling this subject. You know, you just went right at it, and to acknowledge with Roz, you know, the word evil is really so difficult for so many people. So I'm sort of thinking, well, with sweet fortune, kind of get what you mean by evils. So maybe just to articulate how I hear that with you, once you said evil intentions and thoughts, I went, oh, okay, good. Now you're talking about our inner life.
Yeah.
You're not talking about something strange in that way. But it still raises the question, well, and I'll just answer my own question just for brevity's sake. What's an evil thought? What's an evil intention? And so, basically, in a Swedenborgian sense, evil is something in us that is a thought, intention, and an act that can harm other people. And that causes problems. It's not a good thing. So we were able to recognize that and say, whoops, wait, I better not do that again. I wonder what happened. So Swedenborg this is his spiritual psychology. He's a psychologist at this point. And I don't mean that in a secular way. I mean that in an inner psyche way, mental way. That we have an inner life and we can look at it and recognize we have the potential to harm others and be harmed. And we learn from that. So I put that in a hopeful context and how to understand that word. And so just for the benefit of the removing, I did look at that for a long time. And one thing is that we don't remove the evils. I believe the Latin is it's a passive sense. They are removed. So it is divinity that removes them.
Yeah.
It literally means it's in the context of a sphere. I don't mind my saying it. He talks about spheres a lot. A human we present ourselves as a sphere of consciousness in the spiritual world and here. Okay, so the reason that they are removed is, they are then form a boundary within which the sphere is contained. So it's actually a handy way to make a container for consciousness. So we're not conscious of it. We don't have to think about it. The Lord has done it. And I'll just use the analogy of a stone wall. If you're clearing a field and you want to make a garden and it's full of stones and you've cut the trees down and then you remove the stones and you make a circumference around the field because you want to get the stones out of the field. Well, the stones don't have to be taken any farther than the edge of the field unless you want to make a bigger field someday. And that actually is the container of the field. So the fact that they're not ever removed can be looked at as, well, it's like a stone wall. It's a handy fence to have. It's a boundary that contains our consciousness. Anyway, that's a reframe. Take it if you like it. Leave it if you don't.
That analogy can bring up a number of things. But I did want to say, as you may have noticed, that the first part is inward focused. The second part is outward focused. And they're not this and this. They should be going on at the same time within us and outside of us.
Well, part's a good word for the blank, too. The first part of charity.
Yeah. As I said, I was going to leave it as act because I saw so often it's referring to doing.
Right. We need to do it right.
I'll have to think through. Maybe I'll, depending on how I'm talking about the subject, I'll fill in the blank.
Right.
Trevor,
one thing that came up early in your lecture is you said that when we're doing the first part up there, that it's very inward focused, and some people obsess about that.
Mhm.
It's actually the second one that pulls us out of ourselves because we're paying attention to the neighbor instead of ourselves.
Mhm.
Good
That's
point.
my comment.
You're here.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, I mentioned that this part, we can really get wrapped up in and get into an obsessive compulsive thing that we're always having to remove evils, and that's why I brought up the teaching, that it's only 1 or 2 a year. And and all you have to do is, when you think about, you know, a bad thought, a bad word that you're going to toss at somebody, a bad phrase, just don't do it. And it says that's a form of repentance. Yes.
I was thinking about it in the way of, I decide to do something good. I'm going to give to charity, give to the church, or on the opposite, I don't feel like going to help the homeless. In either case, I have to think about, why am I doing this, or why don't I want to do this? So to me, that's the sort of reflective part of it, is rather than just doing things because someone said I should do it, to think about it and think, okay, what am I resisting, or am I just doing this because I want someone to say good job, you know? So to me, it's a reflection before you act, and you might not be able to remove the things that, you know, you may say, well, actually, yeah, I do want recognition, but at least you're working on that while you're doing the good thing.
That was a whole nother subject. Mixed motives. And I decided to not mix my motives and keep to one topic, because it's too easy. The other thing is that there is no lack of ways that we can help the neighbor. So that, and in fact, that one passage just listed a whole bunch of them. So that we may find that, well, that's way of helping others really are urging me to do, but I don't really want to do that. I am more naturally inclined to do this work of charity. Some people, you know, Paul in his talk, they talk about a gift of helps. And there are so many ways you can help out. Some people like to help out things physically. Others like to help out mentally. You know, teachers may be helping in one way, but a wood carver helps in another way. There's so many ways the world, and by the way, the spiritual world, there's no lack of employment in doing good works. I put it this way, that there is no unemployment in heaven. So there'll always be something we can do, and the nice thing about it is something we love to do. Corey.
I want to thank you all for your wonderful thoughts, especially you, Reverend, for sharing this. It's wonderful, insightful. Yeah, I remember Swedenborg saying something about, like, within one evil motivation, there's a lot of different things going on that we are not aware of.
Yeah.
So even though we think of it as one, God, you know, kind of sees all the intricacies and is root, as you all were saying, is really the one working on within us. And it's something we can lean into and allow God to do. And often, of course, you know, when we do something seemingly of our own strength or reflection capacity or whatever, that's from God. And I find that kind of beautiful to realize that, you know, I may find it tough to remove the evil within me, but it's not me doing it anyway.
still in the spiritual world while we're in the physical world. And so we're probably having an impact on others, even when we're somewhat internally focused. And that's not to say that we shouldn't act, because often, yeah, we get too caught up in our inner life and we're not impacting the world around us that we should be. But I also like to think, there's a positive impact on other people, even when it doesn't seem like it's making any impact on them.
No, one way to put it is no one is useless. They're always having some effect on someone else. If not in this world, in the spiritual world. But even in this world, there's some effect somewhere. Nobody is useless. The phrase used earlier is God doesn't create junk. He creates useful individuals. There is a story about those who go to hell sometimes do want to be useless. And so unfortunately they have to be urged and prodded to do something useful. And yet even in that they're being useful. And by the way, we're at the end.
We are.